A pluribus unum, on the seal of the United States, from many, one. From 13 colonies to one nation, our country was founded by unity. Rural Missouri, downtown Manhattan, New England, LA, immigrants from China, Brazil, Zimbabwe. The idea of an American can mean so many different things, but it's still an identity, being American. My father came here when he was 26, and growing up, he'd always tell me, you know what's so great about America? It doesn't matter who you are or who you know, it matters how well you can do the job. And that's an integral part of the American dream, right? This unity found in disunity. That you can be proud of your labels, but they don't define you. It doesn't matter what gods, or lack thereof you believe in, as long as you subscribe to 3 fundamental values: freedom, justice, and liberty for all. It's a beautiful dream, isn't it? My whole life I've heard about the dream. My grandmother fled the communists in China. My grandfather escaped poverty in the Philippines. They faced discrimination, but they worked hard, they learned English, and ultimately they found success. We've fought since the inception of our nation to break down barriers, from landowners to the landless, to barriers of race, of gender. Thinking of the success stories, laws passed, speeches like MLK's "I have a dream," you'd envision a much different America today. We were moving in a positive direction, but now we're getting divided, polarized. And whichever party you belong to, we can all agree that the election changed everything. Both parties are fractured. Whatever direction we're going in, it often doesn't feel like forward. Living conditions are better. Technology is advancing at an incredible rate. Crime rates have been decreasing for decades, but it still feels like we're going backwards. So what happened? What caused this shift away from unity and back towards division? The driving force behind this election and these divisions is tribalism. And this is not a recent phenomenon. It is deeply seated in our culture, our society, our basic human nature. And sometimes we forget this because we're no longer tribes fighting for land. We're not amidst the Crusades, and the Cold War ended almost 30 years ago. But we are naive if we believe that tribalism, integral to our humanity since the dawn of our existence, has disappeared in today's civilized society. Every party, every community, every person has valid concerns, valid ideas, but we ignore this truth through tribalism. Today's iteration of tribalism is based on condition, the fundamental fallacy that our convictions and ourselves are one and the same. This allows us to justify our divisions of red versus blue, left versus right, liberal versus conservative. Because if this fallacy is true, then we can forget that the person on the other side is fundamentally just like us. It allows us to say, you believe in this policy, therefore you are a bad person. Our stubbornness in this regard can divide us. It can impede progress. But it doesn't matter, right? Because at the end of the day, we all still feel like we have the moral high ground. Because it's not us, it's them. The election should not have been a surprise. It was the culmination of these divisions, a strong trend for the last decade or so. And this polarization has terrible effects on our politics. We're constantly in gridlock. Each party just reverses the progress of the other. It's a game with the players of the American people, and everyone always loses. Everything links back to this central trend of polarizing tribalism. And if we are to move forward, our direction, individually and together, has to change. To give you an idea of my hometown, Amherst, Massachusetts, many of the liberals are very anti-right-wing. The town hall put up a Puerto Rican flag one day, which looks quite like the Texas flag. So a woman tried to take down the flag, saying she didn't want that kind of oppression in her town. I remember the day after the election. My school offered therapy sessions to those who felt distraught or unsafe. People left. People were crying. Students lamented America's descent back to the Dark Ages, where misogyny, xenophobia, and Jim Crow ran rampant. And sitting alone in one of my classes, I too began to wonder, had there really been this great, widespread resurgence of nationalist, racist, sexist sentiment in America? But this narrative of a nation that is just totally regressing is false. Yes, racism and sexism played a role in the election. But when Trump wins the election with the same states that won Obama the election, I refuse to believe these were the dominating factors. It's easy to point a finger at something like racism because it's something that most of us detest. Because then we, our families, our friends are no longer part of the problem. It's an us versus them, where the them is distant, detached, disconnected. Almost all of us can go out and say, the KKK is bad, or those protesters with the Nazi flag are bad. And it makes us feel better because extremists are bad. But in reality, this is absolutely not most Trump supporters. Trump's victory is the result of polarization driven by this deeply rooted sense of tribalism. Our recent increase in polarization can be attributed to four main factors. 1, frustration with the economy. 2, the disconnect between the people and the elites. 3, the prominence of our sensationalist media. And 4, our age of information. So first is that frustration with the economy. For the majority of the modern existence of the United States, blue-collar workers could support themselves with a factory job. In our now overwhelmingly service-based economy, this is nearly impossible. And for the last few decades, there hasn't really been a solution for those left out by this shift. I'm from Western Massachusetts, and there are so many towns where the industry is gone, but the people are still stuck there. Unlike places like Germany, which emphasize skilled trades, our culture glorifies pushing paper in an office 9 to 5 over something like plumbing. And the thing is, it's an unnecessary economic burden that our motto for our US education system is, you need a college degree no matter what, especially with how expensive it is. And for those who have been in a declining industry such as coal for decades, this is nearly impossible. And then someone like Trump comes along, and he says, we can get those jobs back, no problem. And you know what? All of your troubles are China's fault. And all of a sudden, the previous economic trends of the last few decades are no longer inevitable effects of globalization. No, they're the result of a trade war that we're losing. It's us versus them, and this is a war that we can win. And this always happens with economic frustration or instability. You look at Germany before World War II with its hyperinflation, or more recently, developing democracies in the Middle East or the Balkans. Political leaders seize that anger and frustration, and they tell you, none of this is your fault. It's theirs. And if we could just beat them, this time it'll be different. But of course, it won't be, because tribalistic division doesn't make a country stronger. It didn't matter whether or not Trump's protectionist policies were viable. He was the only one offering a solution. It didn't matter Trump was a billionaire because he knew how to connect with audiences. He's not eloquent, but he says whatever people want to hear. And he did this exactly where he needed to. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. He was connected while the establishment was detached. And the elites have always been detached, disconnected, but this time it was worse than ever. This is the second factor to our increased polarization in recent years. Republicans and Democratic elites all failed, producing establishment candidates like Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton. Establishment candidates in a time where people are frustrated, in a time where people are desperate for change. People don't trust the system right now. According to Pew Research, the majority of Americans aren't satisfied with the way democracy works in this country. And this is a problem shared with other nations, but when you look at places like Germany or the Netherlands, by far, most people are satisfied. And many voters, especially Bernie supporters, for example, hate the superdelegate system because it's part of that establishment that they can't control. And you can tell voters that Hillary Clinton is an effective legislator, which she is, and some of them might even believe you, but why would anyone vote for someone who is such a prominent part of a system they believe to be broken and corrupt? Voters didn't want a politician, and Trump clearly was not a politician. Then you have celebrities, who essentially say Trump supporters are racist, they're evil. How could anyone elect a fascist? And instead of convincing anyone, you've alienated them. People who already feel forgotten. Furthermore, it's almost as if the elites forgot how people elect a president. Almost never do people elect a candidate based on policy or ability alone. At the end of the day, people elect a person. Voters elect a face, not facts. And attempting to replace the endlessly charismatic Barack Obama with Hillary Clinton, who attempted to dab on the Ellen Show to connect with the youth, was a poor mistake in hindsight. Trump also used the media to win. He capitalized on the media's sensationalism, saying ridiculous things, making sure people were always talking about him. And some people listened. So you have this small group of voters who actually believe in Trump, and all those people who want to just disrupt the establishment, who will all absolutely go to the polls. And then Hillary Clinton, whose main campaign is not being Trump. And then the media says there's no chance Trump could ever win. They essentially confirm Hillary's victory 2 months before the election. Why would any Democrat be concerned about getting to the polls? Ultimately, the media doesn't have a real concrete agenda other than what makes them the most money, right? They want viewers to watch their ads, so they say whatever the viewers want to hear. And they sensationalize everything. This is why they're dangerous. And this is also the third factor to our recent increase in polarization: the influence of our sensationalist media. And we make jokes about the media's exaggerations, right? Headlines like, "Tune in after the commercial break for 5 foods that will give you cancer tomorrow." And it's kind of funny because it's ridiculous. It's not so funny when those same sources are some people's only sources regarding information for elections. And the scariest part is that we loved it. The past presidential debates, if you look at the difference between them and the predecessors, debates like between Bill Clinton and George Sr., the difference in the discourse is incredible. Watching debates now is like watching reality TV or a game show. Candidates trading insults and quips to score points, all while deflecting real questions about actual policy. And they were the best ratings we've ever gotten. I remember going to a party for one of the debates, and there was popcorn and drinks, and there was this stark contrast, laughing at how ridiculous it could be at times, followed by this deep internal guilt like, oops, this is actually our country. The media is there every waking second of our lives, and their constant divisive sensationalism is profitable, but only encouraging and confirming our increasingly radicalized beliefs. This leads me to my fourth and final point: the internet. You'd think with access to endless information, people would be more open-minded, but in reality, it often does the opposite. Because now, if you have an extreme belief, however ridiculous, you can find someone who thinks exactly the same way, or someone who's even more extreme. You can find any opinion, and with our confirmation bias, that tendency to only look for information that'll support our thesis, why would you look for anything that would contradict it? Our tribalism drives us to believe that our convictions and ourselves are the same, so why would you contradict yourself? This is evident when you look at conspiracy theories or issues like vaccination. The anti-vax movement started with one article published in England, linking vaccines to autism. We've since proved that the primary author falsified nearly all of the data, and hundreds of reputable studies find no link between vaccines and autism. Yet, if you look specifically for anti-vax articles, you will find them. And suddenly, in this age of information, it is very easy to verify anything, regardless of the truth. And it gets worse, more complicated, because now you have companies like Google and Facebook who make it very easy for special interests to control all of the information you see while on the web. Ultimately, at the end of the day, Republicans and Democrats all have real concerns. But rather than addressing those concerns, we've become so radicalized that both parties are fractured, mutilated versions of their former selves. We have to stop associating with our team, focusing on left versus right. Blanket statements such as, Republicans won because of racism, or Democrats just play identity politics, are incredibly counterproductive because they ignore the nuance that we so desperately need. We've become morally vain, believing that our convictions entitle us to some sort of moral high ground. that we can be better than someone else because of what party we belong to. So how do we move forward? I'm not going to try to convince you of any perfect solutions. What I do know, and this is a perk of having a family that argues about literally everything, is that if we separate ourselves from our ideas, every argument doesn't have to end with a chair being thrown across the room. We can get over our differences. We can reverse polarization if we realize that fundamentally, on an individual level, we are the same. Tribalism is frustrating because everyone believes what they're doing is right. The challenge is overcoming those instincts, declaring that we are not our convictions. Maybe the American dream was never real, but it doesn't matter. It didn't stop my father, my grandmother, my grandfather from trying. It doesn't stop millions of Americans today from trying. The idea of a great America persists as long as we strive for those fundamental values that make it great. A pluribus unum, from many, one. It comes from the Latin of an ancient idea described by Pythagoras, that the origin of society is a social bond. One idea, that when one loves the other as much as himself, unus fiat ex pluribus, it makes one out of many. And if we can forge that unity, we can reverse polarization, and the United States can be united once again. Thank you.